Hello people on the internet, my name is Sketchbook Sarah and welcome back to my channel. Hi if you're new. I'm a painter and I make videos here on the internet talking about my thoughts while I paint, and today we are going to be discussing the topic of nature. As you can tell by the beautiful warm weather around me, it is currently summer, which is my favorite time of year because I am a seasonally depressed person. I cannot deal with the winter. I'm from Colorado, which is a state that is kind of known for its winter. A lot of our economy and our culture is based off skiing culture and snowboarding culture and wintertime here. And a lot of people love Christmas and they love snowstorms and they love snow angels and buttling up. I don't. I like sweating. I like popsicles. I like warm weather. I like being outside and I love nature. And I think nature is the best when it is summer, except for the bugs. I'm sitting by a creek right now and I will be leaving with a ton of mosquito barks. But today I want to be talking to you about different thoughts on nature, how different books I've read have influenced my understanding of nature, and how I as an artist and other artists like me have used nature in order to influence their art, as well as what nature means to different societies and how we think about nature and what that has to do with colonialism and patriarchy and different systems of power. So how do we as a society think about nature? So when we first think about nature, usually we think about motherhood and mothering. So, what came first, the chicken or the egg? That is an evolutionary process. We think of Adam and Eve. We think of the creator, God, or we think of, in a lot of Native American religions, we think of the sky woman. And I read this book, which will inform a lot of my opinions about nature that I discuss throughout this video, because it is just one of the most moving books I think I have ever read. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. And in this book, the author goes into about how the narrative of Sky Woman versus Eve is sort of the foundation for a lot of Western thinking, not only about how society should be run, but also the natural world. So with the tale of Adam and Eve are stuck in this garden and they have one job where you can't eat the forbidden fruit. And what do? Woman eats the forbidden fruit. And, that's the downfall of society. And because of this, she is punished and she's the creator of original sin. But it's okay because, she is not permanent to this land. She was created out of a rib. She's ultimately going to be moving on to her permanent home, which is in heaven. And the way Christianity frames nature and the natural world. Oh my God, is there a turtle over there? There's totally a turtle over there. The way that Christianity frames the natural world and nature in general is that it is only a liminal space in between, before you're born and when your soul returns back into heaven. In a lot of Native American religions, it's not so much this good versus evil, sin versus temptation and holiness and abstinence and devotion to God. It's not this good versus evil, black and white dichotomy. It's about gift giving. And she talks a lot about how the gift giving model for nature, about how the earth is a gift to us, nature is a gift to us, reflects in how Native American societies were more society and community oriented. And this book talks a lot about how nature is an ecosystem and we need to think about nature as an ecosystem. The way that Western society is rooted in Christianity and man being superior and separate from the earth. When you think of the 7 days, everything was created separately and then man was last and man will rule the earth. Man will inherit the kingdom of earth and man is made in God's image, but the beasts are separate and people who are not the same as us are separate. And so this sort of thinking leads to a lot of division and inequality and hatred and thinking and an us versus them dichotomy, when not only comes to nature and to animals and to plants, but also to this to other people who are deemed as other. The Bible talks about how thick of a rod you should beat your slave with. So there isn't this equality among beings where you think you are untouchable by the environment around you and the environment around you is not hurt or affected by your individual actions because you have a higher conscience, because you are your own God. And a lot of Western philosophy follows this. There's a sort of thinking of in boxes and in controlling the feminine when it comes to nature. I think it's kind of Freudian. There's a reason why Mother Earth is such a through line concept across cultures and why we so often perceive nature and chaos as feminine. We attribute these things to women because women do give birth, and that is an essential root to a lot of envy that turns into misogyny against women. Believe it or not, a lot of men are incredibly envious that women have this sacred power. And that is, in my opinion, one of the reasons why this patriarchal Western religion took root so well, is because it rewrites that narrative and it strips women of their divine power of giving birth, and replaces it with a punishment. After Eve bits the apple, God punishes her by making childbearing very painful for her. And this individualism gives into like the American dream and capitalism, versus like gift societies that were indigenous are about community. And this goes back into like spiritual practices for a lot of Native communities. She talks about how in Native communities, you are as a person as much as the deer is a person, because what is a person? A person is something that has a consciousness and feelings in like a lot of Native American religions and philosophies. And so there's not this superiority of man over all other things. We are a part of a greater ecosystem, and I found it really interesting that we're described as the younger brother species to things like plants and animals that have been here for like millions of years before humans have ever stepped on the foot. Like, we're a relatively young species, and we forget that in the grand scheme of things, we're a very small part. And it's very hubris of us to just need to take and dominate and contain. And this goes back to like some of my points I was saying earlier about patriarchy and how that can go into like environmentalism, because we do view the earth as this like feminine force that needs to be tamed. It's a lot of the same language that we think of as like women. Women are this unruly force, and a lot of men have this urge to dominate and to put into submission. And I know this sounds like, I'm getting very like I'm connecting dots that aren't there, but language is essential to how we think about concepts and universal truths. I'm not a spiritual person, I'm not a religious person, but the reason I find so much value in Christianity and other religions and dissecting them and understanding them is because they connect with people for a reason. And it's all about these universal narratives and these universal truths that we sort of know as a people. And through those things we can understand each other. And though I personally don't see them as like literal fact, it can be very useful to be understanding real life systems and interactions with each other. And a really interesting way that I think that Native American people use this sort of language in a way that's different from traditional Western societies is she talks about how when she was first learning how to speak her native language, because it felt important to her because it's a dying language and it's a language that is purposefully suppressed. America and a lot of other colonialist nations, like I know Canada, has a long history of boarding schools and stripping Native children of their indigeneity by putting them and indoctrinating them into this great American machine. And that's why a lot of people were really appalled by the new change of the Lilo and Stitch live action remake that just recently came out, where if you don't know, in the original movie, the main center of the plot is about how this Native American Hawaiian family is being torn apart by the US government and Child Protective Services. And in the remake, they give the girl up to the state in order for the older one to go pursue a college education. And a lot of people were pointing out how like this is a very big shift and how insulting this is given the history of Native children being stripped by the government to be put into these education systems where they would cut their hair and force them to speak English and convert to Catholicism. And there was rampant abuse and of all sorts of manners and violence and mass graves. It gets extremely dark. Like the things that we have done to Indigenous people as a society is really it's really heartbreaking to learn about, because there really are no instances where we did not screw them over as a government. We constantly shook hands with them and said we would protect them and honor our treaties that we had with them, and we never made good on those. And we destroyed a lot of their teachings. And it's interesting when you're reading this book, it's by a plant scientist, and the way she describes plants, she's also a poet. And so this book is just a beautiful interweaving of science, evolutionary science in specific, spirituality, history, community, sociology, and poetry. It's just one of the most beautifully written books. The way she describes plant processes and she can relate them to different sectors of art. I remember there's a section of the book where she talks about the three sisters, which are corn, bean, and squash, and how indigenous knowledge about nature can be suppressed by these colonial ideas of nature because of the refusal to be open-minded, and how this knowledge about nature is often correct. So one instance is these three sisters, like I mentioned, and corn, bean, and squash are the three plants that like are great, will feed and sustain you healthily through a diet, and they can grow together. And when they do grow together in the indigenous way that we have suppressed, they grow more plentiful, because the way that the crops work is they interlink and they rely on each other to be stronger and to create more vegetables and more food. And the reason why this is so significant is because they're also completely domesticated animals. And one of the main points of this book is that humans and nature aren't necessarily like opposing forces. One must not conquer the other. We're interconnected. And the reason why this is so significant is because corn and squash and beans cannot function on their own. They require human assistance to thrive. And because of this, it's an intersharing of the crops need us to thrive and we need the crops to thrive. And when we practice indigenous teachings like only taking what you need and practicing self-restraint and gifting things and treating it like a gift, like if you're being gifted something, you are not trying to take every last bit you can. You are thankful of what you do get to receive and only take what you need. I find this very true because I have gifted people where I've been like, oh, do you want like I had a friend where I was not a friend. I had a person where I was offering them a candle and as a gift, and I didn't even really like this person, but I just kind of felt obligated to give them one because I gave another person one and I was just being nice. And this person took 2 candles and I told them to take 1 candle and I just was so peeved. I was like, I told you I was giving you a gift in the first place and you take twice as much. And now because of that I never gave her anything again because it just made me so mad. And nature's the same way. When we continuously overfish and we pollute the environment and we take more than is necessary and we don't use our resources efficiently and we waste, oh my god, we waste so much. We waste food, we waste energy, we waste lives, we waste resources, waste, and all in the name of what? Serving greed and gratitude in individual pursuits. It's never about the collective whole, because if it was, we would not be doing the things we do. You know, capitalism is great at generating wealth. It's just an incredibly inefficient system at distributing that wealth for the growth of human happiness, you know. Capitalism is amazing at innovation and a lot of different things, but it does not support overall human happiness, and a lot of that innovation is done at the cost of people who could be helping out on that motivation or could be functioning members of society, or just because they are people. That is why we should care about them, but instead they are poor, they are living on the streets, and we as a society don't do anything about it. And that's just the simple fact. While I was reading about this and I was thinking about humans taking more than they need, I was reminded of this video that I saw recently by Solar Sands, who does these great deep dive videos. And this video was talking about how there really isn't any moral argument against veganism. And despite that, our entire culture has like completely shut down any even notion of hearing them out. But when you think about it, there really is no moral defense against the way that Americans consume meat. We consume meat at an insane levels of amounts, and I am no stranger to this. I also eat a lot of meat and animal products.
I don't need to go into detail about the brutalities of factory farming. From keeping animals in confined spaces, to casual mutilation of these animals, to the fact these factories are not only dangerous to the animals, but also to the people who work in and around them, to their harm to the environment and public health, to the mass killing of animals on a scale that is actually unimaginable. While videos of outright violent abuse are often the result of things going wrong rather than things going right, it is neither efficient nor common to beat an animal to death or wrestle it into a slaughterhouse. There are still common practices today many would consider cruel. These facts are known to anyone with even the slightest interest in where their food comes from. But I will tell you a statistic that I still can't believe is true. As of 2021, globally, 900,000 cows, 3.8 million pigs, and 202 million chickens are slaughtered for food every day. Fish can only be measured in estimates of hundreds of millions. 92.2 billion land animals are kept and slaughtered for food each year. More animals are killed each day than all people killed in World War I and II combined. With that many animals being processed, mistakes are bound to happen. As someone once put it, humans are making reincarnation very dangerous.
The abuse and the waste that this inflicts on the planet is so terrible and catastrophic and monumental, we don't even want to look at it. We shove it into the far corners of our minds. Maybe we get a Jungle by Upton Sinclair and then we still keep going and we just don't care. And every step of the process is just ripe with abuse and cheapening that just endangers not only animal lives but human lives, and it's just a huge scar on the earth. And the amount of water and resources it takes to feed, maintain, house these animals is completely ridiculous. And all of this happens for us to throw it in our grocery stores, wrap it up in plastic, and then chuck it out at the end of the day when we forget about it and when it sits in the back of our fridge and the meat expires. And it's a very sad thing that in order to live in our current society, we have built our infrastructure around suffering and around cruelty rather than beauty and harmony like things are in nature. And there is cruelty in nature. You watch a nature documentary, there's gonna be death and hunting, but when we can use things sustainably, it's not as morally apprehensible as I think putting all of this effort into packaging up an animal just for it to go to waste. I think that every person in their lives should go and slaughter an animal if possible, because I will never forget it. I grew up definitely not on a farm. It actually used to be a joke in high school that I used to go on a farm just because I'm really interested in animals and I'm always on farms for some reason. But anyway, my dad's friend owns a hobby farm, and with his hobby farm, he processes his own meat. That's his thing. And me and my sister will go and visit it, and in exchange, my sister, who wants to be a farmer, will go and will slaughter the animals and help them. And I will go and sketch the baby goats and hang out with them. And though I did help slaughter and prepare these turkeys for Thanksgiving, and I think that it's a necessary process, and I think that in order to ignore it is to do a disservice to the animal that you are consuming. I think that you should always just try to be remembered and cognizant that an animal had to give its life in order for you to enjoy a burger. Native American societies and a lot of societies around the world, and other indigenous societies, are a lot more progressive. They're a lot more egalitarian. They're a lot less focused on hierarchy. They're a lot more inclusive of women. And in fact, they almost celebrate women as like sacred harbingers of life that we are, versus the contrast of like Western Christian society, which is all about patriarchy, domination, capitalism, every man for himself, me versus them, superiority, white supremacy. And I do think a lot of it comes back down to a loving of nature. It's hard to want to conquer things and dominate things and destroy things when you love them and when you appreciate them. And the end goal of patriarchy and fascism and all of that is to destroy natural things in the natural world. Like, being two-spirit is a widely accepted identity in a lot of Native American cultures, and it's much more akin to Western ideas of trans people. And what is the right's main scapegoat right now? Trans people. Women are treated more equally, and things are all acknowledged as, I may not understand it, but I can look at it and I can accept that it exists. Whereas I feel like a lot of Western stuff is all about whipping things into shape and putting things into boxes. And obviously, I am not Native American. I am only speaking from what I have learned from my teachers who are Native, from books I've read by Native American authors, and by media, and just by trying to learn as much as I can and thinking and engaging with this. And I say all of this as someone who is outside of the culture. Just want to clarify. She talks about her experience taking a weaving class and how the care and the spirit that she goes from making this basket out of the whole life of a tree, because she has to cut down a tree to make this basket, and how things like that, where you have to put in heart and energy and soul into them, create this new life force to them that is not inherent to mass reproductive qualities like plastic cups or computers or things like that she prescribes to not having this verb quality that is prescribed in the language. And I think that's really interesting, and it kind of reminded me of what my opinions are about AI art and why I don't think it'll thrive, because it does not have a soul. It's not real. It's not connected to things. It is simply plastic, like thought matter spewed at us. And it's truly nothing in it's no replacement. Oh my god. It's truly no replacement for a fine oil painting that took months to craft, and you can hear the artist pour over all the things they were thinking about when they were creating the piece, and how meaningful it was to them, and how much they were influenced by other people, and how all their inspirations blend down, and how they created an imperfection that they had to work around, you know. One of my favorite pots I made in my pottery class is I made a really pretty pot that I liked, and I dropped it and smashed it, and only half of it got destroyed, thankfully. And I was like, you know what, I will just use this opportunity to make like a tree branch coming out of the side of it. And I was thinking about, you know, I really do like this conflict of man-made versus nature in my pieces, and I like pointing to it because it is an inherent tension that I feel like is always present, that I'm always noticing. So you'll see, as I'm a landscape painter, and I express this by putting a lot of like signage or telephone wires in the backgrounds of my work, because that's sort of how I experience this tension, is that you're in this beautiful ravine, but like in reality I'm like sitting right above like a sewer grate, and I'm like in the middle of the neighborhood, and like people are going by on their bikes, and you can probably hear them in the background, and they can hear me talk. But you're never in this romanticized view of nature, you know. You want to read like Henry David Thoreau, and like there's this idea of like a wild landscape that exists somewhere that you have to go alone explore, and that's not really true. That's sort of a fake concept. And if that nature does exist, we shouldn't go and look for it. We have so much nature here. We're so abundant, yet we don't treat it like a gift, and we don't respect it. Instead of like respecting the land that we have, we tear it up. We have so many houses, yet we have people who live on the streets. We have so much food. We grow an excessive amount of food, yet we have people starving every day. We have an abundance of money, yet people are poor and struggling to feed their children. And this is not a result of a functioning, harmonious ecosystem. This is man-made, purposeful greed and power overcoming the natural order of things. Because I really do, to my core, believe that by natural disposition, most people want to do well by others. Most people do not feel good taking constantly. And I know this guilt must keep them up at night. At least I pray that that's the case. I don't know. But I feel my best when I am treating others and the things around me with kindness, and those things in kindness treat me with kindness. I think it reminds me of the section of the book where she's talking about gardening and how she knows that her garden loves her. And like she was explaining this to her daughter, she was talking about her daughter, and she was like, this concept may seem silly, but from like a scientific point of view, but it's truer on a human level. There's a lot about spirituality. The reason I'm interested in it is because I am interested in science, but there's a lot about science that you can't exactly explain all the way using science. Like, you can explain scientific methods, but there's often a metaphor there that's more universally true than the raw science on paper. And with the garden loving you, the scientific explanation is that you provide the gardens with nutrients, then the plants thrive, you eat the plants, you tend to the plants, they keep producing, and it's a reciprocal relationship. But the human instinct is to label that love. It is tending, it is mutual happiness. That the plants are happy they're being watered and fed regularly, and they wouldn't survive without your attention. And you get to coax fruit out of the earth, and you get to create something with your own hands through attention and caring and patience and sticking things out even when things are hard and it's being frustrating. And you get to sustain yourself that way. And it's this beautiful thing. And she compares it to her relationship with her daughter. And she asks her daughter, who's a very busy person, why she still gardens. And she says, because it loves me like my mother. And I thought that was really beautiful. I've never really been much of a green thumb person myself, but I've always been like a huge nature person. I remember when I was a kid, I used to get taken on camping trips. I didn't appreciate it much as a kid. I was much more into like the iPhone thing. I just wanted to be at home on my iPhone watching YouTube videos, like I'm sure every other kid is these days. You know, we're becoming more and more aware of how terrible it is that our iPads are babysitting our children, and how it's probably going to be ruining future generations. But you're watching me on your iPhone, so I can never be too preachy when you're watching me through the screen. But I didn't truly appreciate it till I was older, and I was truly able to recognize my scale in nature. You know, one thing that people say that they get, this feeling they get, is called sublimity, and it's a very like commonly explored practice in art, especially during the Romantic period. This idea of the sublimity of nature. You know, I think about different paintings. Like, I think Turner made some beautiful paintings about the sublimity of the ocean. And, you know, I think about the man standing over the fog, I think is the name of it. I'll throw it on the screen. I probably I got the name wrong. But there is this beauty and awe in being so small and a huge web of things. And I find that so beautiful. And it reminds me that my problems are really not that big of a deal. And things will go on without you, and that there is always return for a new day. And that a lot of the suffering that is happening will fuel another, at least it will like fuel hopefully another ecological process. So, you know, like it's a great way to deal with death, because when you die, you give back to the earth and you regenerate. And the spiritual way of doing that is like, you know, you reincarnate, or you return to the earth, or you become one with the great drop of into the ocean. And the way I think about it as a more atheistic, scientific person is that my matter will be turned into gas, which will go up into the air, and I will be turned into a big star. And that star will explode. And maybe if I'm lucky, that star exploding will create new life and new worlds. And I think that power is really beautiful and interesting. And I think it's a good replacement for this heaviness that people feel in the face of death, in the face of no promise of eternal life. Because honestly, I find eternity kind of scary. I'm the opposite person, where I'm not scared of not living forever. I'm scared of living forever. And that is sort of the evolutionary purpose of religion. And it can conflict with science, especially in a lot of Western knowledges, but this book really weaves the two together through this beautiful spiritual path. And I really enjoyed reading about that, and I think it can really put towards a lot of like metaphor and universal truth, because even if you don't necessarily believe in a lot of these stories as fact, they're often not used as fact. And I know a lot of Christians view the Bible the same way, where it's not really about fact, it's about morality and truth. And I think that the way that this is prescribed is just more aligned to my truth than it is the Christianity truth. All that being said, thank you so much for watching today's video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell, all the YouTuber stuff. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about nature? Do you hike through it? Do you walk through it? Do you make music about it? Do you write poems about it? Do you draw it? I would love to hear what your favorite way to interact with and appreciate nature is, or if you have any recommendations for me based off this video, as well as if anything of the format. I'm trying to make my videos a bit cleaner, a bit more professional, slightly better audio quality. Let me know if anything about the video and its format bothered you. I'm always trying to improve my stuff, but I'm more than happy to just have a conversation in the comments below. So let me know. Go outside, go on a hike, have a great weekend. Bye!